Nikki, welcome to the No Damn's Given podcast. We're episode, whatever the next episode is. Thank you guys. And if you like our podcast and you want to help defeat the Google algorithm, please hit like and subscribe to our channel. We're now up to 165 subscribers since I looked last, and I just looked a few minutes ago. So that's pretty cool since we started at about 41. Actually started at 0, but we were recently at 41. Today we have Gordon Rogers and Russell Gray with us, and I was just talking about our mission for Pretoria Fields Collective is to promote organic agriculture, sustainable farming, and natural resource management. And we do that in every glass of beer that we sell, through our products that we sell through the brewery, and through the relationships that the brewery has, specifically one with the Flint River Keepers. Gordon is the Flint River Keeper, and we have him with us today. Today's something a little bit different. Most of the time when I'm promoting things, we're actually promoting farming or agriculture. And today we're going to promote one of our most crucial natural resources, which is our water resource. And we're going to do that by highlighting one of my favorite subjects, which is Skywater. So please drink a Skywater beer if you get it, if you like those next time. So thank you, Nikki. So Skywater is and I assume it is, because this may just be local lore, but I assume it's the translated name for Radium Springs, or the local Indian name, because I've never actually seen the Muskogee word for Skywater, which I've looked for quite extensively through whatever literature that I've been able to find. So if any of y'all know that,
it's actually Tatanka.
Tatanka Tatowashi. Yeah, nice reference. So
yeah, do you have your meat in the freezer yet?
So
we actually chased that down, and I think the answer is yes.
Okay, yeah, but you don't know what the word is.
I have it written down on a piece of paper that I don't have with me.
Right.
You can't actually pronounce it.
I can't pronounce it. It's 5 or 6 syllables with a lot of apostrophes.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
It's like the artist formerly known as type thing. You can't pronounce it.
Yeah.
But I will text it to you. It's in the truck. I could leave and go get it probably.
No, we're good.
That's all right.
Well, and so our idea, and one of the things we're doing, and obviously what we're doing here with the podcast is this idea of new media, and how do you connect with the public in different ways and different avenues and different forms in an era where hardly any of us watch TV anymore. And so one of the things we want to do specifically for our portion of our vision for natural resource management is to highlight Skywater Spring, or Radium Springs, actually it's Skywater Creek, right? So Skywater Creek, Radium Springs, through a photo shoot, and we're going to do that November 19th. And this is leading up to that, and so basically we're going to discuss a lot of the fun things that have happened out there, how it's important to the local economy and local community, the fact that it is one of the 7 wonders of Georgia, the fact that if we could revitalize an area around it, it would help both the fishery here, as well as the local economy, as well as probably fishing in general. Everyone who lives in our local area has a Radium Springs story. And so I'm sure after we do the podcast, I'll hear a lot more of those. And so that's the idea, guys. So let's, I guess let's start off by just talking about the fact that Gordon just brought up the fact that it's not really a spring right now. It's more of the Radium Springs mud hole. So why don't you tell us a little bit about that, and what can we do about it?
The spring quit flowing altogether for the first time in the early 80s. And that was, And this is not a blame laying exercise. This is just history. That was about 5, 6, 7 years after center pivot agriculture took off in the area. And that and Procter & Gamble, we know now, have had a direct effect on spring flow. And as the frequency of droughts has increased, which it has, and the depth of the droughts have begun to equal what we saw in the mid-50s and in the 1940s, the periods of time that radium quits flowing have gotten longer. Interestingly, these springs around here, both big and small, are part of what's called spring sheds. A creek has a watershed, and it has ridges that you can see on the top of the land. If you're going up a creek to your left and to your right, it's going to be higher, and you eventually get to the top and you cross a ridge, and then you're in another watershed. Spring sheds are a little different. The ridges underneath are pressure ridges, and they respond to rainfall, to underground geologic features, and to pumping. So you can move the boundaries of a spring shed with pumping or with rainfall, but it doesn't move very far. It pretty much is what it is within, probably a few hundred yards or a quarter mile or something like that. And the hydrogeologists and some of them like Woody Hicks and Elliott Jones, they have pretty well defined the spring shed. So we know which pumps affect radium the most. Now, there's more to learn about how that works. And we just put in a set of gauges a couple of weeks ago, and we're going to put in some more. But Procter & Gamble and the farmers that are in that spring shed are cooperating with us. They're interested in helping. And we're moving kind of slowly at doing it. And there's several methods available, but before I talk about how you do it, maybe let's talk about what's realistic to expect. We're not going to get it back to pre-pumping conditions. That's impossible because the businesses need to stay in business, both the manufacturing business and the farmers. And
I think that's a good point for everybody to understand, that a realistic goal is an attainable goal.
Yeah.
And so, so one of the things that I like to talk about with industrial agriculture has created the world that we see around us. It's also created a lot of the problems that we see around us, and this is just another manifestation of that. I mean, being able to have all this food available. I mean, we have so much food that we actually take the calories out of food to eat. I mean, who in the world could possibly have thought about that for 100 years ago?
And the ramifications of industrial agriculture are also positive in our communities. You go anywhere in Southwest Georgia, and literally the school systems are dependent upon industrial agriculture. The fire departments, the police departments are all dependent upon industrial agriculture through the tax base. And then there's jobs, and there's new jobs because we're able to grow a lot of feed corn. For example, we have poultry industry that's located here, not just growing chickens but also processing it. So there are a lot of ramifications, both positive and negative, with ag. So with regard to the water, and this actually relates to the Florida-Georgia fight, in a expanded sort of way. We're not going to un-Georgia. I've told innumerable reporters that. I mean, you're not going to un-Atlanta. You're not going to un-ag. You're not going to do that. But what you can do is do a better job with the resources that you're managing. These are reachable goals. Probably somewhere between 20 and 40% of the, let's just call it the virgin flow of the spring could be achieved without driving it to zero during a drought and during the dry periods of wet years, because we're actually seeing it go to zero during the dry periods of wet years.
So I have a question. You're saying 20 to 30% during dry times, or
20 to 30% of the drought flows.
Okay.
Because the spring naturally fluctuated. with wet and dry periods. It wasn't the same volume all the time.
Sure.
Just like the springs in Florida were not the same volume all the time. But I'm talking about 20 to 30%, no, 20 to 40% of the low flows, the former low flows, is probably what's achievable. But we don't know for sure. We've put the gauges in so that we can measure progress. So we've got gauges now at the mouth of Skywater Creek where it enters the river, and we've got a staff gauge at the spring. We have a well gauge in an old well that's near the spring, and pretty soon we're going to be able to put some well gauges in some of the wells at Procter & Gamble. So we'll have more data to be able to monitor what's going on. So now how do you do this? In ag, there's two ways, and there's two ways in industry. A lot of people that are listening probably know that modern irrigation equipment is way, way better than when it was first introduced in the 1970s. It's probably on the order of 15 to 20% better, maybe more in some cases, and they're still working on that technology. In other words, using less water per round of the pivot or per pound or dollar of product, so that you're being more precise with the delivery of the water. Most people know that. And making sure that all of the equipment in that spring shed has that most modern equipment is a sort of low-hanging fruit. Now, it's expensive, but it's sort of low-hanging fruit. It's a no-brainer.
So it's almost like having the Energy Star rating on your appliances.
Exactly.
Saying, hey, this entire spring shed is going to be under a mandate to be.
Well, it's not a mandate;
efficient.
it's
not
voluntary.
A mandate. Yeah. Voluntary, but you know,
we would like you to.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we're going to help you to.
Please, yeah.
We're bringing money to the table, and we're going to help you to do this.
Right. And it also
Definitely.
depends on which aquifer they're attached to, right? I mean, maybe explain that to people, because that's a really hard concept.
And that's the second piece of it. The trite way of saying it is source switching. And the source, the easy money, the easy water is Florida and aquifer water. That's the water that's connected directly to the spring and directly to the creeks and the rivers. That's the water you get to at 50, 60 feet down, and it goes for another several hundred feet. That's the easy water. Those wells cost $35,000, $40,000, $45,000 to install with the pumps. The not so easy water is beneath that, in the Claiborne and the Clayton aquifers, and there's even an aquifer beneath those. It's like a giant layer cake. That's not easy water. Number one, it's a whole lot deeper. So these wells are $175,000 to $225,000 to put in to accomplish the same volumes that a Florida aquifer well accomplishes. And this is probably a poor analogy, but it's like sucking a well-frozen daiquiri through a straw. It's just not an easy thing to do because it's a sand aquifer and it's not a limestone aquifer.
The deeper one is?
The deeper ones are.
Oh, wow.
And so you've got a lot more energy costs just to lift it due to gravity, but also because of the porosity, geologists call it the transmissivity of the aquifer itself. So they're more
Great word.
They're
Say
so
that 3 times.
they're so expensive because they're deeper, and they're expensive to operate. So immediately you've got to incentivize somebody to do that. Like, why would I do that? Why would I go out and spend nearly $250,000 on a well when I've got one right here that's already working? You see what I'm saying? And so you got to bring some money to the table to do that. It's a similar approach in industry. For Procter & Gamble, they already have some incentive to go deeper, though. And this is a really interesting factoid that, if you put it in context, tells you a lot. They have a water quality problem. When you're making paper, the cleaner the water when it comes out of your pump, the better off you are in your paper making process. And around here, Florida and aquifer water used to be some of the cleanest water around. It's not anymore. And what happens in some of these spring sheds and some other areas is that the aquifer is so dynamic it gets pulled down so far during the growing season, and particularly during droughts, that when it starts raining again and fills up, you've actually got springs that are backflowing from the river and the creek. And you have a lot of sediment. It's filling up so fast that it's carrying sediment with it vertically also. So there are times when their water is so turbid, or most folks would say muddy, that they have to pre-treat it.
That's the brown downy.
Yeah.
Or bounty.
Yeah.
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 The natural paper towels.
But it actually picks up more water.
It's
Brought to you by
extra.
Procter & Gamble.
And
In case y'all would like to sponsor the No Dams Given podcast.
Yeah.
So they've got some incentive to go deeper. When Miller Coors got here in the 70s, they immediately went deeper, partially because of quality issues, but mostly because the aquifer was already stressed by the time Miller Coors got here, and so Georgia EPD made them go deeper. Okay. They're already on the Claiborne.
Oh, really?
They're not part of this issue, or
is it just that they're further away, or why are they not part of this?
Well, they would not be part of the Radium Springs issue even if they were on the floor dam. They're too far away from it. But they would be part of the larger flow issue if they were on the floor dam. But they're not on the floor dam. They're on a deeper aquifer.
Okay.
So all of that's a very long way of saying that you can manage this by more efficient equipment and by going deeper, but there's a cost associated with it. And we've run some numbers, it's the whole thing can probably be done for less than $1 million, which that sounds like a lot of money. I mean, I always think about, what was it, that spoof on a 007, $1 million. It's
$1 million.
It's just not a lot of money anymore. I mean, it would make a big difference in my life personally, but it's just not a lot of money for these kinds of things. And so it's an achievable goal, and it was quite remarkable the first time you contacted our office, and Jamie Smith said, they want to help out with Flint Riverkeeper, and went through the details, and they've got a beer named Sholey, and they've got a beer named Skywater. And I literally said, you've got to be S-ing me. They've named their beers Sholey and Skywater because we were obviously already working on shoal bass.
Right.
And we already had this somewhat clandestine team of people called the Skywater team that has some really smart people on it that are working on this thing.
A hydrologist is you got to be.
And we have.
It's like I told my kids, like, if you've gone to medical school and residency, you're a nerd. If you're called a hydrologist, you're a nerd.
Yeah,
you really
but
are
hydrologists sponge in the information.
I mean, these are Georgia Tech grads. What can you say?
Yeah, no doubt. So
anyway, we're working on that, and we've already gathered up a little bit of money. We've already gathered up about $60,000 and started putting the gauges in, and we've done some work with some of the farmers, and we're casting around looking for the rest of the money.
Yeah.
And I say this from my previous life as wildlife research technician down in Baker County at the Jones Center. While I was down there, one of the studies that was going on was in conjunction with the DNR. They mapped every spring along the Flint River from pretty much Thomaston, maybe even down to Bainbridge, flow meters at the mouth and as far back as they could dive and get one. And we saw the same thing. Center pivot, half mile away, goes on. The flow of the spring starts reversing, and instead of pumping cold water into the Flint River, it's pulling turbid, warm water into the spring toward the center pivot. So really speaks to the whatever monster word you said, the hydroporosity of of our landscape.
I love that word.
Nice.
Trademarked. But that's,
we're gonna make up 7 more words before this podcast is over.
That's some work you may want to relate to because that was back in 2000. 2001 that took place. So
the Jones Center is actually helping with this project.
Yeah, they're a great resource.
They've got a tech that's helping us named Brian Carter. Campbell. I'm sorry, Brian. And Steve Galladay. They're both on the team.
Yeah. Anybody who runs a team that will go down the banks of creeks feeling for mussels, knowing that there's either moccasins, alligators, or alligator snapping turtles there. Yeah. The fact that his team has all their fingers is a miracle.
Steve's crazy. Love you, Steve.
Yeah, great guy. But
So you just alluded to your previous life.
yeah.
And so one of the things is the biology of the spring and its relationship to the river. I guess springs don't have biology, but springs ecology and its relationship to the river. And how does the fact that the flow is not there can't be healthy. I mean, it can't be. There's got to be a factor or an effect. So is there? And if I'm putting you on the spot, that we can talk about the other things we're going to talk about. But if there's anything, I want to say intelligent. So if we can talk about that intelligently,
Yeah.
if not,
So
we don't claim to be intelligent.
Let me put my intelligent hat on for
Yes.
a minute. Many of the formerly, I won't say native species, well, they are native species, but you look at the striped bass, for instance, it is a catadromous species, so it must go to sea to breed and come upstream to lay its eggs and finish its reproductive cycle. Thank you, sir, while you pass it.
Shoal bass?
Yes.
That was
No.
Striped
Striped
bass.
bass. Okay. But it is a very temperature-sensitive species. And so generally when it gets this far upstream, it relies on inflows of cold water, i.e. springs, to keep it healthy enough to make it back to its original.
So I'm going to stop you there because this is one of my funny stories that I hope I probably shouldn't tell, but I'm going to. So when we were kids, I mean, we didn't have a lot to do, so we'd spend a lot of our time on the river. And I think when we could drive, me and my friend Kurt Colby, we had diving equipment. And so we found a spring that's right on the river. It's beautiful. It's on the guts end of Pineland Plantation. It's 50 foot straight down, right there on the Flint, and it was crystal clear at that time during the summer. Well, the first thing that we noticed was that the striped bass love to go up in there during, and cool off, I guess is what. And they were huge. And when you're seeing I don't know, they looked 10 feet long. But when you see striped bass and you're diving down there and you're diving below them, they look like pretty easy targets. And so we didn't go shoot them with spear guns because somebody told us that was illegal. But we definitely wanted to. So just alluding to that thing. I mean, we had that, and then you'd see huge Appaloosa catfish at the bottom of it. I mean, it's occasionally saw an alligator.
They play a vital role in the aquatic ecology throughout South Georgia. The thermal pollution from industrial discharge into the Flint River has been a major problem for years. You combine that with low flows of cold water springs and creeks, and you're really running into a problem where temperature and oxygen levels decrease. And that's not sustainable for a healthy fisheries population, regardless of the species, much less one that's dependent on cooler water temperatures. So it's not in our best interest to let these springs literally fade away. We need to do what we can to preserve them because it is a snowball effect.
Right. And there's an obvious difference between I love fishing with you up north near Thomaston. That was awesome. And so there's
a totally different hydrologic system.
There's an obvious difference between the fishery that you have and the fishery that we have down here. And it reminded me of when I was a kid. That was what it was. That was, when I was late 80s fishing down here. That's very similar to what, and it just hadn't been like that for years. So, I mean, I don't know if this is the reason or other things have changed or.
But it can be.
It's one person's experience, so I don't know.
Yeah, it's part of what's going on. I mean, when you starve a aquatic riverine ecosystem for water, you get less productivity. I mean, and it's not just the river itself. Major tributaries like the Muckalee, the Kinchafoonie, Itchaway-Notchaway Creek, Spring Creek, plus smaller ones that people are not familiar with. Some of these creeks completely dry up, or nearly so. The base flow in Itchaway-Notchaway Creek, which runs through the Jones Center, in the worst of the worst droughts in the 20s, 30s, and 40s, never got below, and I'm just going to throw out a number here, 110 cubic feet per second. That's pretty low. That's not a big number, but it never got below that. And during the drought of 2010, 11, 12, it got down to 4. That's essentially a creek that's gone.
Yeah.
And that is not good for everything that lives in it.
Yeah. And I think everybody thinks that's true. I mean, you take like a certain, like Democrats, Republicans, they sort of pick up this issue. But as we've talked about before, this was environmental issues were a Republican issue in the 70s. And now it's completely switched to a Democrat issue now for what they want to say about it. But really, everybody cares about these particular things. And if you create a good argument and people understand why it's important. I mean, our fisheries getting is not as good as it once was, and we could really decimate the fish population, south of the dam in Albany. I'm just made that up, but it's just an example of one of the things. Well, we
arguably have. Yeah. I mean, the decimation's not elimination. Decimation was a Roman practice where they went and killed every 10th person.
Yeah. Well.
So I mean, it's
nice illusion.
I mean, it's
paid for your last name to be Diaz in Rome.
and I would say we've more than decimated it. I mean, shoal bass are still quite abundant. Right. They're not on the edge of extinction or in the lower Flint or anything like that, but it could be better. And the stripers absolutely have to have these cold water refuges during the summer, or they will be eliminated.
Right.
They have to have them.
So speaking of stripers, there was a plan at one time to use the Skywater and use Radium Springs as a fishery or as a hatchery, correct?
Yes. It's a rather ancient plan, as ancient as you can in government times. But there was some opportunity to use the cold water clear spring habitat to reintroduce striped bass that had been used for reproductive purposes. So you go somewhere else, you catch male, female, you let them have their thing, smoke their cigarette, and then because of the antibiotics and steroids that they've been on, they need to be quarantined for a certain period of time before they can be released back into a natural habitat. But to create an artificial habitat with the cold water and the alkalinity, et cetera, that would benefit them most would be tough. So, hey, here's a spring. It's big enough we could use it to essentially gate off or fence off the ability for the fish to swim out into the river. But then, hey, your quarantine's up, lift the gate, and they can free to go.
When you say ancient, how long ago was that plan?
Been in the past 8 to 10 years. I don't remember the exact date.
I was thinking 30 years or 40, but
10 years in government must be a long time.
I'm guessing it is.
Guessing. It doesn't seem like that long.
Depends on whether you're collecting money or spending money.
Probably. I mean, obviously, and I guess that's how we led into the conversation. If we don't have flow there, then that's not a very
why even put
not a very reasonable project.
Yeah, it's kind of like, I think PETA would be all over us if we threw striped bass into a dry hole. Well, it's a spring; it just doesn't have any water in it.
So the average person, we've talked about the water resource. I mean, we used to do things at Radium Springs. It had a beautiful, what do we call it? We call it the casino. It had a beautiful casino, and was around it. I think after it flooded finally in was it 91? 94 flood that they finally tore it down, which I think was a tragedy. But
I think it was after 98.
Yeah.
Flood 94 and another one in 98.
Another one
it was
in
after
98. They finally got rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
How do we make this important to people? Because to me, we talked about the resource part.
Well,
we talked
I think the first thing we do is we get it flowing again.
Yeah, amen.
So we have something to show them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I've been.
But to show, you got to raise $1 million to get it flowing again.
Yeah,
it's going to cost $1 million. So to get people to put $1 million into something, how do we? To me, the natural resource, I'm sold on it because I think I see what I live here. I see it all. I see the bigger picture of it. But to the average guy who's here, why is it important to him? Why? If it's going to be tax dollars, some of those might be. Some of it might be.
I think that's a really interesting question. I don't think we're going to need a public outcry in order to get the money.
Yeah.
I see some ways to do that because it's iconic and there's enough people in power that remember what it was that
Right.
I think we can get that done. I've been on teams of people that got projects like this done for other purposes. And, fisheries management purposes, flow purposes, et cetera. It's just sort of a quiet game that you play in Atlanta or at City Hall or the county commission, and you can get these kinds of things done without a lot of noise.
Mm-hmm.
And usually the less noise, the better.
Right.
I think what's going to be interesting, though, is once we get it flowing again, what can we do with it? Because I'm already getting phone calls, and these are really strange phone calls to me, but I didn't grow up in Albany.
Oh, your car warranty expired.
Well,
Because I get those all the time.
or
I tell you.
or what's it called? The period is open where you can buy government health care.
Open enrollment.
Yeah, which seems to be 12 months a year with the phone calls
Well,
I
I'd
get.
love it to be enough that people
Yeah.
could practice diving in it. It's
Well,
a
the
beautiful
phone,
spring.
I've
Yeah.
actually had phone calls that said, "Well, you're not going to let people swim in it, are you?" All right, so I've had those phone calls, and here's my answer. I want to get to the point where we can have the public argument or whatever it's going to be, discussion
People can swim in it.
Well, there's enough water in it so that
to
it can,
argue over.
To argue
so,
over.
so that we
Because right now it's not an argument.
Right now there's no argument.
Yeah.
There's
We
no
can-
discussion.
We could actually line up and bathe.
Yeah.
Yeah, one person at a
One
time.
person at a time.
Yeah.
5 gallons per person.
But
Yeah,
take
yeah.
this back to when I was a kid. When I was a kid, a couple of things that I remember about that are people diving in the spring and dying.
Sure.
And so apparently it's a very different. It's a catacomb. It's not a tunnel. And so once you and I learned this from listening to Paul Deloche, who I think was a Flint River Keeper board member.
He was our founding board chairman. in
Board
fact.
chairman.
Yeah,
So
he's mapped that entire thing to the degree that it can be.
yeah, very interesting guy. Did natural what's it called? The Natural Geographic. Did a couple of things on springs in Wacoa Springs, and I'm pretty sure they did one here. And so listening to those things and the usage that it used to have, how cool would that be to have diving and scuba diving and have people to be able to be certified here and use that as a resource. And right now it's so limited you can't even paddle in from it. When I was a kid, you could paddle in from the river and paddle up and look at everything, and it was privately owned. It's privately owned, so then we paddled right back out.
I think what you want is something that if people go visit it, they'll want to come again. And right now, people come visit it and they're like, "Oh, this used to be something cool." Because if you go around and read all the signs and look at the spring, the conclusion you go away with, this used to be something really cool.
Yeah.
Well, you're not going to go visit again.
Used to be.
Of something
Yeah,
that
that's a
used
good
to
point.
be.
So
you
let
know.
me ask you this, because this discussion, this whole topic came up Monday at the county commission meeting, right? So we have a consultant working on plans for development of county property around the springs. There's about 90 acres on the north side of the spring and Skywater Creek that the DNR owns, that is in a legal position that nobody else is going to own it, and there's only so many things you can do, but they can allow you to do some things on it, right? And then the Radium Springs Golf Course area. Obviously, the county
with the trails that are being developed.
Right, the
there.
county owns that. We're going to have the Flint River Trail system come down Radium, cut into behind the springs and the bridge. We're in the process now of looking at the bridge and determining if how we can get permitted to put the trail system right over it. So that area around it, it's important to keep the watershed somewhat native. Number one, because all the other species that rely on that, but two, just from an aesthetic perspective. What do you see from you're looking from the water out? Tell me what your vision would be for that area. Curious.
I haven't walked the entire property, but it would be really nice if it were public use in some fashion, whether that's trails, whether that's being able to kayak in and out of there, whether that's being able to swim but stay away from where you're going to knock your head on a rock. Whatever it is, I think that it's a wonderful resource, and that there should be a public aspect to it. That's my personal opinion. Flint Riverkeeper has no position on this other than we need to be restoring the flow in this spring. I don't live in Albany. If I lived in Albany, I would damn sure want this thing restored, and I'd want to get into that discussion about what we're going to do with it. And Flint Riverkeeper's happy to be part of that discussion, but I don't think we need to be leading that discussion.
Well, I think by default you're a vital part of that, because if your fight to restore the flow and protect the spring itself and the spring system is successful, then that reinvigorates the attraction. Right?
It puts it back on the list.
Yeah. If Providence
Georgia's
Canyon
wonders.
washed out and it was just a big gully instead of a canyon, nobody would want to go. It's just a big ditch, right?
It's a pretty magnificent ditch.
It is. It is. The big ditch. So my point is, I think it takes many entities working in different aspects to make this entire project and concept come alive again. And I applaud your efforts and look forward to working with you guys in the future on your efforts to reflow the spring, because that takes the pressure off the county and other entities to figure out how we're going to do that. So if you're lobbying different pockets, that's fine.
Yeah, the county's on the team.
Yeah.
Spencer Lee's on the team.
I'm sorry.
No. Well, he was another founding board member of Flint Riverkeeper. I worked for a lot of interesting characters over time. And so is the Soil and Water Conservation District, which is Marty McClendon and now Perry Campus. It was Casey Cox for a while. Mark Masters from the Flint River Water Policy Center is on the team. And at some point when we get this flow going, and we will, we need to be thinking about, do we now dissolve this team and then the county and somebody takes over and there's a new Skywater team, or do we grow this team, because now the discussion is not about restoring flow, it's about how to use this resource.
Well, looking at all the other springs that are along the riverbed from here to, I can just say that the one in Newton that I was talking about earlier, I've gone to it several times in the past 15 years, and it's been a vortex, not a spring. And so that's disturbing when when you dive down and there's no cold water, and maybe it's right at the mouth, or so if you can come up with a plan or a formula to fix one, maybe we can fix the others.
That's exactly right.
So it's not just about radium.
This will be a transferable process
Yeah.
if it works, and we think it will. This approach will be transferable to other portions of the Lower Flint.
Yeah, that's the biggest other one that I know of besides the radium.
There's some really cool ones, and I don't know them all.
And Paul told me about one that is sitting right in the middle of the Flint River, and it's got some sort of prehistoric critter that's sitting on the floor bed that he's found. And he would never tell, because we were 16-year-old kids, he would never tell us where it was because he knew we would immediately go and try to dive and find it. So,
well, I know where there's one in the middle of the river, and it's near Radium Springs, and Paul showed it to me.
Well, that's funny. Well, you're
Was there a prehistoric critter or not?
I couldn't tell.
Yeah.
I didn't dive. But he calls it the blowhole, and it's right in the middle of the river, just a few hundred yards upstream of the Radium Springs boat ramp. And it's actually one of the outlets of the Radium Springs system. And when the river's really low and Radium Springs is not flowing, it's still flowing. And when you're coming down the river, if you look, you can actually see like a hump in the river because there's so much water coming out of it.
That's got to be it.
That it humps it up.
Where's that?
It's just a few hundred yards upstream of the Radium Springs boat ramp.
Oh, how interesting! That would make sense.
And he calls it the
blowhole.
The blowhole.
Mm.
It's a cool spot. One of my favorite ones is Bovine Springs, which is down in Baker County. It may be far enough south to where it's in Decatur County, but I think it's in Baker County, and it's on the west side of the river, and it's like right on the riverbank. And it's got 3 holes. And the other day we were down there, Fall Float on the Flint, where you spoke about your beer.
Yes, sir.
We were down.
I do that a lot.
We were talking about beer.
We talk about beer a lot.
Gina and I were fishing, and she kept asking me, well, are we at Bovine yet? Are we at Bovine yet? It's like, I don't know, but I don't think you're going to miss it when we get there. And all of a sudden, there it was, and there was so much water coming out of it that it looked like one of those bubbling mud pots at Yellowstone, but without the mud. I mean,
Right.
it was just like it was over on the riverbank dancing.
La Brea tar
That's
pits.
pretty cool.
Yeah, it was just happening, and we went over there and hung out a little bit. And it's beautiful. There's one down there called Hog Parlor. There's one down there called Westrick. There's Wilson Blue Spring that's on the Nonami property. There's all kinds of beautiful springs up and down this river.
So one of the things I wanted our politicians here so that I could encourage them was to get a hatchery south of our dam. And I know they bring some. I know the southern hatcheries in Perry, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And I know they bring some fish down here, and they do some repopulation. But to close out, can y'all give me you guys' opinion of what a hatchery south of the Albany Bridge or the Albany Dam would do, and to encourage fishing, local area, just Department of Natural Resources investment. I think a great place might be right next to, or at least close to Radium Springs. And so tell me your thoughts on that. Or if you have a thought, if you don't have a thought, that's fine too.
Well, not being with the DNR Fisheries Department, I don't have an official position, but I can tell you that from budget crunches and just the needs, is there a need to repopulate species X, Y, or Z? Is there a need to invest in the fisheries hatchery in this area? I mean, we've got one in Cordele. I think that one's shut down. You got one in Perry. So depending on
can we create a need through fishing?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, man, I guess that's my point. Is there's no need. What's that? In Helen, we always go to that place, and there's the Unicoi Park. What's that?
Yeah.
what's the name of the creek there that we fish in? Smith Creek.
Smith Gall.
And so,
Mhm.
you know,
that's Duke's.
I mean,
that's
Oh, that's Duke.
Smith Creek.
So it's Smith.
I mean,
okay, I'm not familiar
there would be
with
no
Smith.
fish in Smith Creek if it wasn't for repopulation of the fish every year.
Right.
And it creates its own industry of fishing itself. And so, I mean, if someone was repopulating repopulating the shoal bass, I mean, for fly fishing XYZ, I mean, I just think it would build upon itself.
I was going to ask if you were specifically talking about shoalies.
Yeah.
Is that
Yeah.
okay? Well,
Definitely.
here's the issue with shoalies in the lower Flint, or the issue we know about. There's other issues.
Pull that mic up too.
And
bud.
this is equally true in the section of the river between the Warwick Dam and Cheehaw as below Cheehaw. Hydropower generation releases make the river jump up and down a few feet every day when they're generating. There's a sawtooth pattern to the hydrograph to the level of the river. It's almost like the tide going in and out, and it happens every day. And the problem with that is that during spawning season, when fish make their nests, and bass, along with red breast, bluegills, etc. It's a family called centrarchids, and they're nesters. And they make nests, and they guard them, and they guard the young. When they're young, they're a fairly advanced species as fish go. And if you make your nest at a place that's going to be dry 6 hours later or 8 hours later, that's no bueno. It just doesn't work. And so the spawning is attenuated as best we can tell. There hasn't been a lot of work on what's called year class success for young of the year shoalies yet. There is some interest at the Warnell School at UGA in that topic, but we need to get it funded. But our best guess is that the operation of the hydropower dams is interrupting the spawning of the shoalies. That's our best guess. And so that's why the hatchery at Perry from time to time supplements the river between Warwick and Albany and below Albany. So there is justification for stocking, we think, but that's a separate question from is there justification for another hatchery?
Sure.
Those are two different questions. Those are two separate issues.
I want the economic development and the investment in Albany and specifically in Radium Springs. And so I guess I'll end with that. So thank you guys for joining us today on the episode of the No Dams Given podcast. And I appreciate everybody being here. Please drink a Shoalie, and we'll give a little more money back to the Flint River Keeper.
And if you don't like IPAs, drink a Skywater. They're delicious.
Like the Skywater Brewery's right there. And yeah, so thank you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you.